I knew attending my stepmom's wedding would be uncomfortable, but nothing prepared me for the moment I walked into the hall and realized they'd intentionally placed me at a table completely alone. Everyone else laughed, posed for pictures, and blended perfectly into their beautifully arranged seats. Except me. I was the outcast, the reminder of everything they wanted to erase. I tried to pretend it didn't sting, but the embarrassment pressed harder with every passing second, until a shadow fell over my table. A stranger, well-dressed and confident, slid into the empty seat beside me as if we'd known each other for years. He leaned close, lowered his voice, and whispered, "Pretend we're together." Before I could process anything, he took my hand, and suddenly every pair of eyes in the room snapped toward us. That was the moment everything in my life shifted, fast. If you've ever been treated like a stain someone's trying to hide at their celebration, like proof of a mistake they wish never happened, hit that like button right now. Welcome to the Formidable Revenge channel, and I appreciate you being here, where family betrayals cut deeper than any stranger's cruelty. Subscribe, because what unfolded that night at my stepmother's wedding burned down every lie she'd built her new life on. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. This gets darker before dawn breaks. Victoria wasn't finished humiliating me. She'd orchestrated every detail of my degradation with surgical precision. The ceremony program listed immediate family, my name conspicuously absent despite my father Richard standing beside her at the altar. The seating chart placed me between her elderly accountant who smelled like mothballs and cigars, and two sullen teenagers forced to attend by their parents. Harper sat at the head table in a custom bridesmaid dress that cost more than my monthly rent, toasting her new family while pointedly ignoring my existence. "Speech time," the DJ announced. Victoria glided to the microphone in her champagne silk gown that probably cost $8,000. "I want to thank everyone who made this day perfect. My beautiful daughter Harper, who's been my rock through everything. Richard, my soulmate who showed me what real love looks like after so much darkness." The darkness. That's what she called my mother. The woman who died 3 years ago from cancer while Victoria was already sleeping with my father, already planning her takeover of our family, our home, our entire existence. "And to new beginnings," Victoria continued, her voice dripping with practiced emotion. "To leaving painful pasts behind and embracing the family we choose. The family we choose. Translation: the family that excludes me." Harper's friends at table 12 whispered loud enough for me to hear. "Can you believe Richard's daughter is even here?" Victoria said she's basically a reminder of his biggest regret. "I heard she tried to break them up multiple times. So desperate. Pathetic, really." My fingers gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles went white. I'd come tonight because my father begged me to, because some naive part of me hoped Victoria might show basic human decency on her wedding day. Instead, she'd turned my attendance into performance art, a living exhibit of the daughter she'd successfully erased from Richard's new life. "Don't move." The voice came from directly behind my chair, low and commanding, cutting through the noise like a blade through silk. "Pretend you know me. Now." I turned slowly. The man standing behind me wore a charcoal Armani suit that fit like it was made for him specifically, 6.2, with sharp features and eyes the color of storm clouds. He moved with the kind of confidence that suggested he'd never been relegated to table 23 in his entire life. "Excuse me?" I managed. He slid into the empty chair beside mine with fluid grace. "Your stepmother just spent 10 minutes telling my colleague from Bennett and Associates how concerned she is about your mental stability. Something about you being unable to accept your father's happiness and probably needing professional intervention." His voice carried an edge sharp enough to cut. Thought you might want to change that narrative. Heat flooded my face. Across the ballroom, Victoria was gesturing animatedly to a silver-haired man in an expensive suit, her face arranged in an expression of theatrical concern. Even from this distance, I recognized the performance. Poor Victoria, burdened with such a troubled stepdaughter. Saint Victoria, so patient with Richard's damaged offspring. "Who are you?" I whispered. "Callum. Callum Bradford." He leaned back, draping his arm along the back of my chair with practiced ease. The gesture looked natural, intimate. "Corporate attorney from Manhattan. I'm handling the merger negotiations for Bennett and Associates, which, ironically, is the firm your stepmother's been courting for months." His eyes tracked Victoria across the room with predatory focus. "And you're Eliana, the daughter Victoria pretends doesn't exist except when she needs sympathy points." The words hit like physical blows. "She told you that? She told everyone that?" Something dangerous flickered in his expression. "I've been watching her work the room all evening. You're her favorite prop, the troubled stepdaughter who can't move on, the burden she bears with such grace and patience." He paused. "Except I know exactly what kind of person uses someone else's grief as social currency." His hand found mine on the table. The contact sent electricity up my arm. Immediately, heads turned. Victoria, mid-sentence with the Bennett executive, froze. Her champagne flute tilted dangerously in her hand. "Follow my lead," Callum murmured, his thumb tracing deliberate circles on my wrist that felt calculated and dangerous. "Let's give them something real to discuss." Victoria materialized at our table within 90 seconds, Harper trailing behind like an obedient shadow. Her wedding train swept the floor with dramatic flair, the diamonds at her throat catching the light. "Eliana." Her voice climbed half an octave, tight with barely masked panic. "I didn't realize you knew Callum Bradford." "Old friends?" Callum said smoothly, his fingers tightening possessively on mine. "Small world, isn't it?" Victoria's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the flash of alarm in her eyes. "Eliana never mentioned this connection." "I keep my private life private. I found strength somewhere beneath the layers of hurt and humiliation. Unlike some people who broadcast every detail for validation." The barb landed. Victoria's jaw clenched. Richard appeared at her elbow, confusion written across his face. "What's going on?" "Just catching up with Eliana," Callum said, his smile cold and precise. "She was telling me about her marketing work. Fascinating campaign she developed for the Children's Hospital Foundation. Raised over 2 million in donations, didn't you, Eliana?" I blinked. He'd done research on me. Victoria's expression cracked for just a moment before she recovered. "How wonderful. I'm so glad Eliana's finally found some success. We've been worried about her career struggles." "Career struggles?" Callum's voice went sharp. "She's the youngest senior marketing director in her firm's history. But I suppose you wouldn't know that, considering you seated her next to the catering station instead of with family." The confrontation drew attention from nearby tables. The ballroom felt smaller suddenly, the air thicker. Victoria's carefully constructed facade showed hairline cracks. The seating arrangements were complicated. So many guests to accommodate. "Right," Callum said, his tone suggesting he didn't believe a word. "That's why you introduced her to the Bennett partners as Richard's daughter from his first marriage who's still processing grief in unhealthy ways. I believe your exact words were, 'We're giving her space to work through her issues.'" Victoria's face went pale beneath her professional makeup. Richard's hand fell from her waist. "Victoria, you said what?" "I was trying to explain the family dynamics." Her voice took on a desperate edge. Context. That's all. Context, I repeated, something breaking loose inside me. Is that what you call telling everyone I'm mentally unstable? Is that context when you removed every photo of my mother from Dad's house within 2 months of her funeral? When you convinced him to skip her memorial service because it was unhealthy to dwell on the past? Richard's face drained of color. Eliana, don't. The word came out sharp, final. Don't defend her. Not this time. Callum stood, his presence suddenly imposing. Your wife has spent this entire evening painting your daughter as a problem that needs managing. She's told the Bennett executives, the wedding planner, half the guests at this reception that Eliana is emotionally unstable, professionally unsuccessful, and unable to accept your new marriage. His voice carried across the growing circle of witnesses. She's systematically destroyed your daughter's reputation to make herself look compassionate. Harper stepped forward, her face flushed. You don't know anything about our family. Actually, Callum said quietly, dangerously, I know quite a bit. He turned to Victoria. Should I tell them? Or would you prefer to? Victoria's champagne flute trembled in her hand. I don't know what you're talking about. Trevor Langston. I gasped. My ex-boyfriend's name hung in the air like a grenade. Tell your husband about Trevor. Callum continued relentlessly. Tell him about 4 years ago, when Eliana was engaged to a brilliant software engineer. Tell him what you did to make sure that wedding never happened. My legs went weak. The room tilted on its axis. How do you know about Trevor? Callum's eyes met mine, and I saw regret there mixed with something harder, hungrier. Because Trevor Langston is my first cousin, and when his engagement imploded 4 years ago because of evidence that he was cheating, because text messages and emails mysteriously appeared proving infidelity, I helped him investigate. He turned back to Victoria. We traced everything back to you, to a woman named Victoria Chen, who worked as a grief counselor at the hospice where Eliana's mother was dying. The world stopped spinning. You had access to Eliana's phone when she came to visit her mother, Callum said, his voice cutting through the absolute silence. You copied contacts, passwords, private conversations. Then you created fake evidence of Trevor's infidelity using information only someone with intimate access to Eliana's digital life could have. Victoria's hands were shaking now, champagne sloshing over the rim of her glass. That's insane. Is it? Callum pulled out his phone. Because I have IP addresses, timestamps, forensic analysis of the fabricated emails. I have proof you systematically destroyed Eliana's engagement because you were already planning to pursue her father, and you couldn't have his daughter in a stable, happy relationship. She needed to be vulnerable, isolated, grieving. She needed to be someone Richard would feel obligated to worry about instead of someone who might see through your manipulation. The words detonated like bombs across the ballroom. Guests stopped pretending not to listen. The band had ceased playing entirely. Even the servers stood frozen, witnessing the implosion of Victoria's perfect celebration. That's not true, Victoria whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Richard, you can't believe this. My father stared at her like he'd never seen her before. When did you meet Victoria? When exactly did we meet? At the hospital benefit, she said quickly. 6 months after Margaret passed. I told you that. Except that's not true either, Callum said. Richard, your wife started volunteering at Mercy General Hospice 8 months before your first wife died. She had access to patient files, family information, visitor schedules. He looked at me. How many times did you mention Trevor to the kind counselor who seemed so interested in your life while your mother was dying? Memory hit like a freight train. Victoria in her volunteer scrubs, bringing coffee, asking gentle questions about my life, my relationship, my struggles balancing work and caring for Mom. Victoria sympathizing about wedding planning stress, relationship doubts, the pressure of commitment. Victoria suggesting that Trevor seemed distant lately, that men sometimes strayed when faced with a partner's family illness. "You were planting seeds," I breathed, "the whole time." "I was being supportive," Victoria insisted, her voice climbing toward hysteria. "You were stressed, confused. I was trying to help you see reality." "You fabricated reality." Callum's tone was merciless. "You created fake email accounts using Trevor's name. You sent explicit messages to women's dating profiles, then forwarded the responses to Eliana. You doctored timestamps on text conversations to make it look like Trevor was lying about his whereabouts." Richard's face had gone from pale to crimson. "Is this true?" "She destroyed my life," I said, my voice stronger now, steadier. 3 days before my wedding, I called everything off because I was convinced Trevor had been cheating for months. I lost him. Lost the deposit on our venue, lost relationships with friends who thought I'd gone crazy. Tears burned my eyes, but I wouldn't let them fall. And then, 6 months later, you introduced me to your new girlfriend. The volunteer grief counselor who'd been so helpful during Mom's final days. Victoria's wedding dress suddenly looked less like a fairy tale and more like a costume. "You don't understand. Your father and I connected over loss, over grief. What we have is real." "What you have," Callum interrupted, "is built on the systematic destruction of his daughter's life. You didn't just pursue a widower, Victoria. You engineered his daughter's isolation so she'd be too broken to interfere with your plans." Harper grabbed her mother's arm. "Mom, tell them this isn't true." But Victoria's silence was damning. She stood there in $8,000 of champagne silk, surrounded by 180 guests who'd witnessed her perfect mask crack and shatter. "I have all the evidence documented," Callum continued. "Forensic reports, IP trace logs, testimony from Trevor about the timeline of events. I've been waiting 4 years for the right moment to expose what you did." 4 years? Richard's voice was hollow. "You've known about this for 4 years?" "Trevor figured it out about a year after the engagement ended," Callum said. "But by then, you and Victoria were already engaged. Eliana had cut off all contact with him. We couldn't prove anything definitively until recently when Victoria started planning this wedding and got sloppy with her digital footprint." I stared at Callum, the fairy tale dissolving into something more complex. "You came here tonight for revenge." "I came here for justice," he corrected. "Trevor asked me to attend, to make sure you knew the truth. He's remarried now, has a daughter, built a good life in Seattle. But he's never stopped feeling guilty about how everything ended, about not fighting harder to prove his innocence." My chest felt tight. "So this whole thing tonight, dancing with me, defending me, it was all calculated." "The plan was calculated," Callum admitted. "Show up, reveal the truth, destroy Victoria's wedding the way she destroyed yours." His expression softened slightly. "But actually talking to you, that wasn't part of any script." The ballroom had descended into chaos. Victoria's carefully curated celebration crumbled like a sandcastle against tide. Guests whispered frantically, phones appearing as people documented the implosion of Charleston's social event of the season. Bennett and Associates executives huddled in concerned conversation. Harper sobbed into her bridesmaid bouquet, while Victoria stood frozen, her perfect bride persona shattered beyond repair. "I need air," I announced to no one in particular, pushing through the crowd toward the gardens. Behind me, Richard's voice rose in anger, demanding answers Victoria clearly couldn't provide. The spring night hit my face like cold water, jasmine and magnolia heavy in the humid Charleston air. Callum found me by the fountain 10 minutes later. Eliana, wait. Wait for what? I spun to face him. Another revelation? Another strategic move in your revenge plot? You used me tonight just like she used me 4 years ago. That's not fair. Isn't it? My voice cracked. You came here with an agenda. I was just the weapon you needed to destroy Victoria. You didn't care about helping me. You cared about justice for Trevor. Callum stepped closer, his expression intense. You're right. I came here planning to expose Victoria, to make her face consequences for what she did. Trevor asked me to attend this wedding, told me you'd probably be here, asked me to make sure you knew the truth about how your engagement ended. He paused. But the moment I saw you at that table, treated like something shameful to hide, I stopped thinking about Trevor's revenge and started thinking about yours. Words, I said bitterly. Just words. Then let me give you facts. He pulled out his phone. This is Trevor's number. Call him. Ask him yourself what I'm doing here. I stared at the screen, my ex-fiancé's name and number glowing in the darkness. 4 years of silence. 4 years of believing I'd thrown away something real because I couldn't trust. Couldn't see past manufactured lies. My finger hovered over the call button. He wanted you to know, Callum said quietly. Not for him. He's moved on, built a life, found happiness. But he said you deserved to know you weren't crazy, weren't paranoid, weren't the problem. Victoria was the problem. She's always been the problem. I pressed call. Trevor answered on the second ring. Eliana. His voice was exactly as I remembered, warm and steady. Callum told me you'd probably call tonight. Is it true? The question came out strangled. Everything Callum said about Victoria, about what she did to us? Every word. Trevor's voice held old pain. I spent 2 years trying to prove my innocence, Eliana. Those emails, those text messages, they weren't mine. Someone with sophisticated access to digital systems fabricated everything. When Callum finally traced it back to Victoria Chen, a grief counselor who'd worked at your mother's hospice, it all made terrible sense. My legs gave out. I sat heavily on the fountain's edge. I'm so sorry, Trevor. I should have believed you. You believed what looked like evidence, he said gently. Victoria is exceptionally good at manipulation. She knew exactly how to exploit your vulnerabilities during the worst period of your life. He paused. Callum coming tonight. That was my idea. Not for revenge, Eliana. For closure. You've spent 4 years thinking you destroyed our relationship through paranoia. You deserve to know the truth. Destroyed us. Tears finally came, hot and bitter. I don't know what to believe anymore. Believe that Callum's telling the truth about Victoria, Trevor said firmly, and believe that you're stronger than any lie she told. I have to go, Eliana. My daughter's bedtime. But I'm glad you finally know. The call ended. I sat there holding Callum's phone, the fountain's gentle splash the only sound in the garden's darkness. Trevor's right, Callum said, sitting beside me. Victoria is poison. She infiltrated your life during its most vulnerable moment, sabotaged your happiness, then moved in on your father before the dust settled. Why does she hate me so much? The question escaped before I could stop it. What did I do to deserve this level of calculated destruction? Callum was quiet for a moment. I don't think she hates you, Eliana. I think she saw you as an obstacle. Your father is wealthy, successful, respected. But he had a devoted wife and a daughter, who'd inherited her mother's intelligence and strength. His voice went hard. Victoria needed you broken, so Richard would be distracted, protective, too busy managing your crisis to notice her manipulation. She needed you isolated so no one would believe you if you eventually figured out what she'd done. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. My mother's final months, Victoria always there, always helpful, always asking questions about family dynamics, financial arrangements, my relationship with Richard. Victoria suggesting grief counseling after Mom died, recommending a therapist who happened to be her friend. Victoria being there when Richard was lost and drowning in grief, offering comfort, understanding, patience. She engineered everything, I whispered. The destruction of my engagement, my isolation, Dad's dependence on her. Sociopaths are exceptional planners, Callum said, and Victoria is very good at what she does. Behind us, raised voices echoed from the ballroom. Richard's anger, Victoria's desperate explanations, Harper's sobbing protests. The perfect wedding had become a crime scene, evidence of Victoria's long games scattered across tables and dance floors. What happens now? I asked. Callum met my eyes. That depends on what you want. I have enough documentation to pursue legal charges, fraud charges regarding the fabricated evidence. Trevor and I built an airtight case. But pressing charges means dragging your father through public scandal, destroying Victoria's reputation completely, making this nightmare very public and very permanent. I considered it. The revenge I'd fantasized about for 4 years was suddenly available, documented, provable. I could destroy Victoria the way she destroyed me, watch her perfect life burn down to ash and rubble. But something stopped me. Not mercy, exactly. Something more like recognition that Victoria had already destroyed herself. Her wedding was in shambles. Richard would never trust her again. The Bennett and Associates deal she'd been pursuing would evaporate now that the executives knew about her manipulation. She'd lose the life she'd schemed so carefully to build. I want her gone, I said finally. Out of my life. Out of my father's life. Completely removed from any position where she can hurt anyone else. But I don't want to spend the next year in legal battles, watching her play victim in court. Callum nodded slowly. That's fair. And honestly, probably healthier than prolonged revenge. We sat in silence for a moment. Then I turned to him. Why did you really help me tonight? The real reason. Not the one about Trevor's closure. His expression shifted, vulnerability breaking through the calculated exterior. Because I saw you at that rejection table, isolated and humiliated, treated like an embarrassment at your own father's wedding. And I remembered Trevor telling me about the brilliant, kind woman he'd almost married, the woman who'd lost everything because someone wanted her broken. He paused. I wanted to give you a chance to fight back. Not for Trevor. For you. And the dancing? I asked. The possessive hand-holding? The performance for Victoria's benefit? Started as strategy, Callum admitted. Became something else when you laughed at my terrible joke about the chicken being drier than Charleston in August. His voice went softer. You're not what I expected, Eliana. You're stronger, funnier, more resilient than someone who's been through what you have should be. Don't, I said. Don't make me into some kind of inspiration. Callum smiled slightly. I'm not trying to. I'm just saying the woman I met tonight is nothing like the broken victim Victoria described. You're remarkable. And I'd like to get to know the real you, not the version someone else created. Before I could respond, my father appeared in the garden entrance. He looked 10 years older than he had at the altar. His tuxedo rumpled, his face gray with shock. Eliana. His voice broke on my name. I didn't know. About Trevor. About any of it. Victoria told me you'd ended your engagement because of trust issues, because watching your mother die had made you unable to commit. I believed her. Of course you did, I said, not unkindly. She's very good at being believed. Richard moved closer, his hands shaking. I'm calling off the wedding. Annulment. She's already agreed to leave tonight, to move out of the house, to disappear from our lives. Good, I said simply. I need you to know, my father continued, tears in his eyes now, that I loved your mother. Completely. Devotedly. Until the day she died and every day after. Victoria convinced me that moving on was healthy, that letting go of Margaret's memory was necessary for healing. But she was wrong. I should have honored your mother's memory. I should have protected you instead of believing lies about you being unstable. The apology I'd needed for 3 years should have felt satisfying. Instead, it felt hollow, too late, insufficient for the damage done. But I accepted it anyway because anger was exhausting and I was tired of carrying it. We'll figure it out, I said, but slowly, with boundaries, with honesty. Richard nodded, relief and grief warring on his face. Whatever you need. After he left, Callum and I sat by the fountain for another hour. We talked about everything, nothing, the wreckage of the evening and what came next. He told me about his law practice in Manhattan, his complicated relationship with family, his belief that some betrayals were too calculated to forgive. I told him about my marketing career, my apartment overlooking Charleston Harbor, my slow process of rebuilding a life Victoria had tried to demolish. I fly back to New York tomorrow, Callum said eventually, but I'd like to see you again. Properly. No hidden agendas, no revenge plots. Just dinner and conversation. I studied him in the moonlight. This man who'd walked into my nightmare evening with a plan for destruction and somehow given me clarity instead. This stranger who'd defended me when no one else would, who'd exposed truths I needed to hear, even if they hurt. One date, I said. But we do this right. Complete honesty, no manipulation, no games. Just two people getting to know each other. Deal. He smiled, and it transformed his face completely. 6 months later, I stood in my office overlooking Charleston Harbor, reviewing the marketing campaign that would earn me a partnership in my firm. Victoria's lies hadn't destroyed me. They'd forged me into something stronger, sharper, more resilient than I'd been before. Callum and I talked every day. He visited Charleston twice a month. We were building something real, slowly, carefully, with the kind of honesty that only comes from understanding how devastating lies can be. Trevor sent a card congratulating me on the partnership. His daughter had drawn a rainbow on it in crayon. We'd never be close again. Too much history, too much pain. But we'd made peace with what Victoria had stolen and agreed to stop letting her theft define us. Victoria disappeared to Denver. Harper sent occasional emails struggling to reconcile the mother she'd known with the manipulator everyone else saw. I responded kindly, but distantly. Some damage couldn't be repaired, only accepted and moved past. The revenge I'd craved that night at Victoria's wedding hadn't required me to do anything except survive. Victoria had been her own worst enemy, her schemes eventually consuming the life she'd fought so hard to build. The real victory wasn't her exile or Richard's guilt or the destroyed wedding. The real victory was standing in my office, with a career I'd earned, a relationship I'd chosen, a life I'd rebuilt from the ashes of someone else's arson. Victoria had tried to break me to clear her path to what she wanted. Instead, she'd taught me exactly how strong I could be when everything else was stripped away. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction. It's just living well enough that the people who tried to break you become irrelevant to your happiness, become footnotes in your story instead of entire chapters. That's how you actually win. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to the Formidable Revenge channel for more tales of justice, resilience, and how betrayal can transform into unexpected blessings. Drop a comment below, sharing where you're watching from and whether you believe some wounds ultimately lead us exactly where we need to go. Sometimes the cruelest betrayals clear the path to our strongest selves. This is Eliana, reminding you that the sweetest victory isn't crushing your enemies. It's building a life so fulfilling that they become irrelevant to your joy. Thank you for being here with me tonight.